Hello and welcome to episode 8, the final episode of this series of the Game Factory podcast. Once again, I'm joined by Mike Bithell and Andrew Smith.
Hello.
Um, and today we're going to finish our conversation on marketing. So last week we tried to sort of give in broad strokes a bunch of different marketing tools that you can use and how effective they've been and our experiences with them and that kind of thing. But today we want to dig in a little bit deeper, specifically on how to get the actual attention of the press, and then we'll talk about YouTubers and how they're different from the press. So let's start with press coverage. Do either of you want to sort of talk about what your main strategy is to actually try and get their attention and get them to cover you?
I mean, for me, it's been a very long-term kind of objective, just to build those relationships, let them know that I exist, talk to them enough when I don't need something, so that when I do need something, it's not weird. And it's just, I mean, it's good old-fashioned like networking stuff of just like, going to events, talking to people, chatting to people, generally not being an asshole. There you go. There's your first beep, nice and early. And just kind of, getting some kind of connections. And then, when I've got something to announce or a press release, I'll just send an email I keep just a spreadsheet of everyone's email addresses, where they write for, who they are, and then just copy paste that into the BCC field, not the to field. I did that once, and like, oh my God, it's in slow motion because you see that email going out. And yeah, it's like honestly quite straightforward, my approach, and I assume pretty standard.
Yeah.
Is that right, Smithy?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I think there's one thing you touched on there, which is very important, which is that maintaining that conversation, like even when you're not actively, after a press release being covered. I think I've noticed coming away from mobile and into sort of more mainstream or sort of like hobbyist gamer stuff with Steam. There was kind of like a weird sort of gear shift, and the fact that between the two, so like there was like my mobile stuff, then there's now in this bit here was in the middle was the Appy Nation work, whereas I was doing a slightly different job to that you would as a developer. As a publisher, you have a portfolio of work, so you're much more frequently contacting the press directly about, hey, here's a thing coming out, we'd like you to cover it, or we'd like you to review it, here's some codes or whatever. Whereas as a solo dev or whatever, as a small company, it's like once every year or so at most. I would think that you actually have a really big thing, like maybe 1 year is the announcement of the game existing and the next is it coming out or something. So yeah, it's really important to kind of not let it lull. And I think, I don't know, Mike, if you're even able to talk about this, but I thought one of the interesting things about your, about Volume, I don't know how it came about, but the cover image that you got on, was it Official PlayStation Magazine UK?
Yeah, it was Official PlayStation Magazine UK, and it was the subscribers only one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example of, like, and I guess this is something that's going to come up. I should probably come up with a crappy name for it, but like, it's my approach basically to everything business wise. Is I try for 10 stupid things, and then one of them happens, and I don't tell you about the 9 that I tried and failed at, and therefore it looks cool when I achieve something. So this is a brilliant example of something where I think I'd seen No Man's Sky on the cover of Edge. And I was like, No Man's Sky is like a much bigger deal than me. But like, I can probably go and get maybe I can go and be a filler. That was my plan, was like, there's got to be situations where they want to have something on the cover and then it falls through. And I was like, if I made it known that like, I'd like to be that filler. And that's what I did. I just went to a bunch of different people, and this is where having a few contacts and being able to chase who do I talk to at such and such about the cover of their magazine. And I just basically sent a cheeky email going, hey, I don't know how these things work, but at some point I'd love to have a cover for Volume. I can produce really cool artwork, it can be exclusive to you, we can do some kind of exclusive interview or something. I have no money to give you, but like everything else. And it happened. Like it just kind of, I guess something dropped off. I think as well because of the subscriber thing, they don't have to worry about like the cover enticing someone into buying the magazine. Like if you're in on the shelf in Sainsbury's, you want to make sure that like a game that people are excited about is on the cover. But I guess they either they liked volume or like they didn't have a great deal of things for subscriber, for the subscriber covers, and they let me in. But it's one of those examples of something that looks clever if you assume that every time I go out and do something like that, it works, which is not the case. Like with volume, there's lots of things I tried, lots of favors I asked for, lots of whatever that just didn't happen, and you kind of have to do that in order to hit it big with one idea. So it's not as clever as it looks. Basically, is my point.
I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is you guys both talk about that relationship that you have to build and sort of maintain and sort of. I feel like it's as much about understanding what's interesting to them and what kinds of things they're covering, what their thesis is, and that kind of thing. Like, I mean, I want to draw a big distinction between like, oh well, you get pally with these people and they're going to cover your game, because really, when it comes down to it, you need to get to know them so you know what to pitch to them. And let's talk a little bit about like. How do you pitch something that's actually worth covering for them?
Well, obviously, first you pay them. No, I'm joking. Like, actually, honestly, my experience has been the complete opposite. Like, if you look at volume, like, specifically, like, how it's been received by different press, without fail, all of the ones that I am probably, like, closest, and by close, I would say, like, a friendly professional relationship, they all hated it. The people who really like volume are the people who don't know me. So I read into that what you will. But like, I don't think any journalist would ever risk their professional reputation pretending to like something they didn't, just because it's really not worth it. Like, no indie especially has the kind of money to make that worthwhile. And I would honestly assume that most of the big companies wouldn't either. Like you only ever get your integrity once, right? Like you can't get that back. So I think people worry a little bit more about that than they maybe should. I don't think we have any influence. But yeah, I definitely put the game into the hands of people who I felt had the most chance of liking it. Like, I think that's part of it. So for that, it's just a case of like following someone's work. Like, is someone talking about games like yours? Who's like the go-to games journalist on the subject of the genre that you're doing? And can you get a copy of the game into their hands? And also, I find that often you get really good feedback from those people. Like, we certainly with Volume, I showed it to some super stealth Metal Gear fans. And they came back to me with like, no, you should change this because this needs fixing, and we did, and those things make the game better. So, yeah, I would always say like find the people who you think have the most chance of liking your game for sure. But yeah, it's not, you can't really manipulate these people, and you should most people would laugh you out of the room if you tried.
Yeah, I mean, if let's say you're pitching to someone and let's say you've never met them, but you kind of know what they're into, like. What is your approach to trying to tell a story that's worth covering for them? Do you customize? Do you think about how to pitch your game to them, or do you just sort of pick your target cleverly and pitch your game the way you want to pitch your game?
Go on, Smithy.
That's a really good question.
That's why I gave it to you, because I haven't got a good answer yet.
Nothing pithy here either. No, I think the safer route might be that you hone your pitch. Separately, you've gone to shows and you've like we said last week, like it's a really good way of getting like, what is it actually that's exciting to people? And then if you find that exciting as well, obviously you're making the game, you should, then I think a lot of that passion just comes across naturally. So I think by just finding someone who's got an interest in the genre is about as far as you need to take it, because the rest is basically the lap of the gods, and you need to just trust in the fact that you can communicate what is exciting and that you are communicating the right things because you've already gone over it a million times. It's like writing a script or something. You go over it and over and over it. You can't really edit enough. You just have the time that you have, and it will get better each time you go over it. And I think that's probably the sort of, like, we've often talked about how like there are all these ways and means of doing things, and like ultimately you can't actually like measure whether it was a success, but it's like definitely the sort of safest, most sort of, it seems to make the most sense, the most logic, if you like. And a lot of the time I think every single games journalist I've met who, like, let's be honest here, people who are paid money to write about games, not necessarily like some of these sort of peripheral sort of hobbyist writers, but they're all lovely people, very professional, and open and interested. You know, like it's kind of up to you to screw it up in a way. If you get in touch and if they are responsive, then it's up to you to to throw away that chance. I think they're already kind of optimistic about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have responded. And do you know what? It doesn't take that much to get that interest because they're into games and writing about them because they're passionate about them, and something they don't know is an interesting thing. Like it could literally be anything until you say what it is, and then it's that thing, and you just hope that still excites them.
And be prepared that some of them won't like it. And lots of journalists won't care or not like it. Like I see a lot of people, a lot of indies react really negatively, to every bit of negative response they get to something, and it's like you're never going to make something that everyone loves. You can make something that most people love, but I think even that's super rare. I think it's always going to be a trade-off and a balancing act of finding various different reactions, and you've got to remain a professional in those situations. They're professionals, so behave like professional.
And I think a lot of the time they'll probably just say, "Oh, hey, but I know someone who might be interested." Even in that situation, because
that's their job. And ultimately, you've got to remember that your game has value. In terms of to them, they're not doing you a favor so much as they're trying to create content just the way you are. In the same way as you need a raw material in order to make your game, you need an artist to draw something. They need a game in order to write about games. So you're also providing a service to them. So as Smithy says, they're not there to, at least at the like he says, the professional end. They're not there to mess your day up or cause hassle or confusion. They are there to make stuff about games. So that relationship can be incredibly beneficial to both parties.
Yeah, I think a mistake that I often see is that people don't they don't think about what the story is that this journalist is going to write. They're just thinking about, oh, here's all the things I love about my game. Here's, oh, we have, these, boxes ticked or this kind of thing, or I think I'm really important or that kind of thing. And I think anytime you're pitching a story to someone, you are pitching a story. You're pitching your game as well, but you're specifically pitching here's this thing that I'm presenting to you. If it's interesting to you, it'd be great if you'd write about it. If it's not, then totally understand.
Yeah. I think the mistake a lot of people though make, and I've certainly seen this a lot of times, and I think honestly we're partially responsible. I remember I think me and Smithy were on a panel about this at one point. I feel like a developer or something, me and you were on a panel together, and a couple of years ago now, and I remember saying that give them an interesting story about you. What's interesting about you as a developer? And I think that honestly, I feel like they've heard most of those stories at this point. Unless you are from a really weird background or really got a strange personal story or a moving story or something, it's just not interesting. So I while I agree with what you're saying, Moo, that you always have to think about what's the angle, what's the story here. At the same time, it's okay and probably preferable if that story isn't about you as a developer, it's about the game. What's your game doing that's interesting? Yep. Which audience is going to be excited about this game? What are the things that you're doing that are innovative? Or how does your game kind of fit into kind of current conversations about video games, or trends or stories or those kind of things. I think more than the kind of we're just three guys who grew up loving this kind of game and we're starting a Kickstarter. Honestly, that story that worked for us a few years ago, but those stories aren't as interesting, I think, anymore to journalists as they used to be.
Yeah, and I think you have to be very clever about it. I think there's a trend that I attribute to you, Mike, which was we'll announce our game and attach a big voice actor to it, and you see a lot of people leading with that now.
Yeah.
And it's they've said literally nothing about the game, and there's a voice actor, and I think it worked once or twice afterwards. But I think now it's a story that they've all been pitched 100 times.
But it didn't work for us. That's the thing is I think people. This is something I constantly am up against with Thomas Was Alone. People remembering it wrong. Thomas Was Alone. With all due love and respect to Danny and the amazing performance he did, him being in that game did not achieve us any points in PR. And I would say honestly, Andy Serkis's connection with Volume didn't get us we got headlines, but we'd have got headlines if we'd released a new trailer or some screenshots or something. There was enough anticipation for that game that we were going to get that anyway. So I don't think the big name actor thing Like, if you're working with a big name actor for the PR win, I think you're working with a big name actor for the wrong reasons. You know, I work with big name actors because they're very good at acting.
There's a reason.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you know, on a personal level, like, it's just really cool to direct Andy Serkis for a day. Like, that's just a fun way of spending an afternoon. So I think people misunderstood. I don't think Thomas Was Alone definitely didn't sell on the back of Danny. It did, I think, eventually it sold on the back of its story, but I don't think that was because he was a name. I think it's just because he's a good actor. Yeah. You know, so I'm surprised, because I've noticed that as well. It's a weird trend, and I don't think it's chasing a success that ever happened, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, so let's talk a little bit about interesting stories, because you talked about how sometimes it's too much about the dev, and I do think there's sometimes that it's not necessarily too much about the game, because it can't be too much about the game, but it's like too much specifically about how you view your game. I think there's a lot of times where you need to take a step back and think about what about this game is interesting to other people. You know, like I think there's a lot of times where people say like, oh, I'm making this game and it's just a better version of these things. And I don't think that incremental like storytelling is very interesting. Like, you have to find the thing that's like, that would be very hard to say about a lot of other games. Like, you know, the dev story that I mentioned last episode was the one about the African dev team. But I also think, you know, like I think about the Undertale pitch of just like, it's, you know, it's an RPG where nobody has to get hurt. And that's something you can't say about a lot of games. And I think you really do need to think about what is the thing about your game that you can't say about a lot of other games.
The one sentence pitch, I mean, just in terms of like, honestly, from a game design perspective, of like, it's something that's often said about Molyneux, is that he incorporates PR into his design process, right? Like, he will have an idea as part of that, and he'll test the water on that idea. And I actually think that is actually a valid, maybe not to that extent, but it's a valid approach. You know, like, I'm sure that, well, while the design of Undertale was going on, having that single sentence in their mind at all times probably helped focus that design and made sure that everything was pulling towards that objective. So I think even if you don't care about the marketing, even if it's just a design philosophy that you're kind of focusing in on, we certainly, you know, we had it with Volume. Volume is a game about being really, really clever, and the feeling of being really, really clever. So every single choice we made had to pull towards that, otherwise it was a bad choice for the game. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I was thinking about when we got on this topic is just trends, and you mentioned it, of just like, you really do kind of need to be aware of like, what are the industry trends that are happening, but I think you need to be very careful about it. You need to think about trends that are just starting to happen, and if you're a part of that trend happening, like, you know, like when Kickstarter started, you know, like, you know, if you were the first Kickstarter after Double Fine, it's quite interesting. If you're 3 years later and everyone funds via Kickstarter, it's not really a trend anymore. It's sort of just the new equilibrium. But then I think there's also the interesting thing of when you go against a trend, when there's, you know, well, there's sort of the new equilibrium and it's sort of established, and you're doing something very different than that. My cat is pushing my laptop. I think that's another opportunity to think about.
I actually think that might be like an easier thing to do as well. So the whole issue with trending chasing trends is you're too late. Like, you can't, like, well, okay, so there are caveats, right? So the Kickstarter one was a caveat because technically, like, in a couple of weeks you could have a pitch ready. And technically, with small enough games, you can react really quickly and have something out like that's worth playing, worth paying money for in a few months, you know. But broadly speaking, if you're looking at like these like year by year trends, and you're going, right, this is a trend now, I'm going to make a game in that. By the time it's out, it's just going to be old. So if that's the kind of like angle you're going to go for, then I think like saying, well, this trend that's sort of just starting, I should probably just do something that's anti that. Because by the time it arrives,
everyone will be tired of it.
Just generally be bored of the trend anyway, and then you'll be like, "Oh, hey, the fresh new thing." So yeah, and I think a lot of the time, you see trends, and they happen because of basically societal sort of weirdness and psychology, and all these kind of impressive reasons that are very, very complicated. And there's probably a word for it. But yeah, and so like actually things that are like, oh, they caught that wave. It's like, yeah, they didn't even know the wave was there. They were just also making something that was, you know, that they're not the only people to come up with an idea along those lines, and it just so happens that that's what it takes. A few games, a few bits of media that sort of have enough impact, and you've got a trend all of a sudden. So it's a funny one to sort of like think around.
Well, I think that's the trick as well. I think there are trends that you have a bit of warning on. So the current one I'd say is VR. Is that, you know, VR has been being talked about now for quite some time, and, you know, it's going to be a mainstream, probably the mainstream's perception of video games next year is going to be all focused on VR, because that's going to be the stuff that's on TV, that's going to be the stuff of, you know, morning news shows, you know, the hosts kind of, whoa, it's amazing, it's the holodeck. So, you know, there was a bit of a lead in time, so while we were kind of coming to an end on volume, we started thinking like, well, actually, this is a mechanic that, you know, I was playing around with VR and I was very excited about VR and making some prototypes. And one of those prototypes was, well, how would you do volume in VR? So that was something that we could kind of jump on. And that means that, yeah, we'll be one of the first titles to release. But that's very specific with the timing and very specific with the opportunity. The other thing is, and this is the trickier part, and this is what I think Smithy was alluding to, was that you don't have to be planning on a trend, but if you're aware of the trends, then you can often attach to one or see one. Smithy's, hey, there you go. Colette has delivered a Christmas hat. That's awesome. So if you are aware of the trends, you can tie your boat to one, right? So like right now, let's say if I was working on, I'm trying to think of a recent example. If I was working on like a JRPG kind of Undertale style game, and I had been for like a year, I would totally be trying to think of a way that I could frame that in the conversation around Undertale. You know, lots of people chatting about it, big fan community. If I were making that sort of game and I thought that there was an opportunity to kind of join that conversation with my game, then I would, you know, and sometimes those come along, you know. You know, if the prevailing conversation turns into, if you realize you're making Deep Impact and Armageddon's coming out, then you can plan around that and use that. But that still requires engagement and paying attention, not just paying attention to the gamer side, like the you know, the Kotakus and the Polygons, but actually like what's on Gamma Sutra, what's being talked about on GamesIndustry.biz. Don't read the comments on GamesIndustry.biz, but they're horrible.
And definitely don't post them with your real name if you're going to say something horrible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or do, like if you're a racist in the audience and you want to like let everyone know so we can avoid hiring you, then by all means comment on GamesIndustry.biz. That website, brilliant above the comments section, awful underneath. But yeah, like paying attention to those things, because often like game devs chat about this stuff down the pub. There's certainly stuff that I'm expecting to trend in 2016 that I'm not seeing mainstream press picking up on. I'm not going to say about it because I'm doing some work in those areas myself, so I'm not going to spread that. But like there's definitely things that I think are coming up that people haven't quite twigged yet. So paying attention to those conversations and trying to be a bit ahead of stuff can be really useful. But I think it's more of a framing thing in a marketing perspective. Like, I don't think you should ever sit down and go, this kind of game is doing really well, I'm going to start a game, for exactly the reason Smithy said, it takes too long. Yep. But I think if you're already making a game, you can be looking at how stuff's being received. We found it with, you know, volume of Metal Gear Solid. I mean, basically our technique was just to run away, just avoid that. But there's certainly like other stuff that can be more efficiently used, I think.
Yeah, I mean, something you mentioned there was if you see these trends, you don't need to hop on every one. Like I feel like there's like the note I put down is don't ruin your game for one story, because I feel like sometimes you see that happen where, you know, they're developing something and they see a trend and they're like, well, we want to hop onto that bandwagon, and suddenly you just have this really weird, incoherent, mixed up thing. And it's like
crafting.
Yeah, it's now a roguelike and you know, kind of thing. But yeah, it's like you kind of need to have some confidence in what you're making and make sure that, like, you know, you're pitching what you're making and you're not letting the trends, because as we said, these trends are just going to keep coming by and coming by, and if you're a trend chaser, you're just going to be trying to hop on every bandwagon and never releasing anything.
And if you don't jump on the bandwagon, then maybe you're a trend starter, which is very exciting. You know, if you can ever, like, I've never been in that position, but I imagine that's pretty fucking cool. Second bleep there, apologies.
I like that you're numbering them, so I know if I miss one, I'm like, oh.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to help out future move. Time code there is 26 minutes in, but of course, if you found this conversation, then you already know where the bleep is.
The other thing I want to talk about is this sort of snowball effect. Like, I feel like I was thinking about, should you take the time to like tailor all your emails, or should you just sort of do this big blast? And I feel like if you have no coverage, you really need that first person to cover you, because I think once you start getting coverage, it becomes easier and easier to get coverage on things.
Yeah, it's
I think that's sort of, yeah, that validation of like, if one site sees, oh, that other site wrote about this and they have an audience, maybe I should be writing about this too. And I think that's really important to consider when you don't have much coverage. I think when you have tons of coverage, you need to be less and less concerned about that.
Yeah, it's like it's. I mean, the snowball term's good. I used to call it like a ladder, like, because you just take step by step, and there's only so much you can do, like as let's say one person, but you can basically have a checklist, and it just goes from someone who, runs a gaming blog and they're just doing it out of fun and they like your kind of game, and then you probably are going to get coverage there. But then you need to just have a realistic idea of like the sort of strata of games websites and outlets and all that sort of thing, and essentially use one to leg up to the other, and you know that it's working when you start seeing it happening in places that you haven't emailed. Like that's
the real trick.
And that's why I like that method, because you can literally just have a checklist, and then as soon as things appear that you haven't like got notes next to, you're like, oh cool, it's actually worked. And if you don't see that, then you just keep on doing it until you run out of people. And that's fine.
Yeah, I remember that moment with Ring Fling, and obviously I was sending it to Mobile Games Press, and then I got an email from USA Today and coverage on the Huffington Post. I'm like, what? Where did these come from? And obviously, some games editor somewhere saw some coverage somewhere else and was like, oh, okay, that seems kind of interesting.
They've got to write a lot of articles a day, so most of the time they are sat. They're looking at their inbox and they're looking at their competitors, and it can work really well. That.
Cool. Should we talk a little bit about how to make it easy for the press? I think one thing that's obviously the first on that list is create a press kit. Make sure all your assets are the right size and easily accessible. I guess include your keys in the email.
Yep.
If your game is out, make sure to include a key. Don't say, "Oh, if you're interested, please email me back," because they won't. Or they might, but it's another step for them to have to do.
Yeah. Think of it as if you're making an indie game, you're probably a designer on some level or other. Think of it as design. You're designing the process by which they can write about you, and you need to put as few steps as possible. Yeah. Steam keys, Dropbox I use for like if I have big files, so I don't fill their inboxes, where it's just like all of the stuff they could possibly need.
Labeled sensibly.
Yeah, labeled sensibly. For screenshots, don't take a screenshot and put your logo on it or anything, because that'll piss them off. When you're giving them imagery, make sure the imagery is 16:9, because most of the websites, that's how they're structured to show stuff. Like tall and thin images are like the worst thing in the world for any outlet. Everything's super easy. Give them lots of contact details. Give them, maybe a bit of colourful text that they can quote you on. That kind of set something up. Just keep it so simple and so easy that it would be. It's obvious to them. It's just a copy and paste job, because they're very busy people, and they're always in a rush, and they've always got a deadline. So. Make it really easy for them. I've gotten so much coverage by just being the easiest story in someone's inbox that day. Like it's amazing what you can do. And the other thing, of course, is timing. Make sure that you're not sending this email out during E3 or at Christmas or on any kind of holiday where people. I've seen. It can be really difficult. The flip side of that is sometimes it's funny to counter program. Like if you find, one of my most like successful kind of bits of trailer coverage was I sent out a trailer the day before E3 because I just knew that no one would be announcing anything or talking about anything. So I got crazy coverage because no one else was there. But then, the following year, I think a few different people tried the same trick, and then it was, you've got to be kind of coming up with something weird each time, or picking. If you're outside of kind of countries that were predominantly Christian in terms of like coverage, then by all means send out your press releases on Christmas Day, because none of the Western companies will be, and all of those websites from those other countries will be kind of trying to find some content. So yeah.
One suggestion from chat, Jordy288 says gameplay GIFs in the email as well. Just, something immediately there that gives them a sense of what's going on.
My only fear with that is file size. I've had some people be sniffy, and understandably so, about like a 5 megabyte email. I mean, it's less of a problem now. Yeah. It's less of a problem as time goes on, but I've definitely seen that. I would say the best solution would be to have kind of a press kit website or something with a link, and say like there are animated GIFs on this link or something, or a Dropbox with those in, although those won't display as well. I wouldn't put that in the email body personally, but it's honestly, there is no right answer, and because I'm not putting those in my body, maybe yours is going to look better because it's got those in. What are they saying? Oh yes, be sure to compress your GIFs appropriately. Tiny Build I find does it well. Cool. Those would be the guys. Ask Mike Rose how they compress their GIFs.
Yeah. I guess another question is, how do you build your press list? Obviously, there's the people you meet in real life, but where else can you start finding, start building up these things?
Well, Pixel Prospector, right? That's probably the best place.
That's good.
I'm keep meaning to contribute to that actually. But yeah, so Pixel Prospector is just a great site for indies. It's got all kinds of lists of wonderful contacts with useful information. But also, you tend to find them in surprising places. So I think some shows, they will send out a press list in Excel form to exhibitors and things like that, and you just want to try and make sure you add that to your list. But basically, Excel or Google Sheets is your friend. Make it as stalky as you want. No one's ever going to know. Like if you happen to know that this person loves dogs because they tweet about them all the time because you follow them on Twitter, and then you make a game with a dog in it, then that is a very good reason to send them something.
Yeah.
If they're tweeting funny GIFs all the time and your game has funny GIFs coming out of it all the time, do that. It's like, I keep comparing it to like the dating scene and stuff, but it is creepily like it. Like it's like the stuff you're not really allowed to do.
Stalk them, right? That's yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's not socially acceptable in things, but all of that stuff you got to think a bit stalkery, because it's.
Can I just jump in at this point and say that I do not agree with Andrew Smith's views on the dating world? I would like to distance myself officially from his statements. And to be honest,
with a games journalist, but not to.
It does require some elbow grease, there's. But honestly, if you can name a website, then in quarter of an hour's worth of Googling, you can probably find what their email addresses are. You can probably, because you can find, maybe if you don't, let's say you want to get an email to Bob Smith at IGN, right? Bob Smith at IGN, you might not have his email, might not be on the internet, but if you can find the email address of anyone at IGN, then you will know what the naming convention for their internal emails are. So it's lowercase first. Okay, so it's B Smith. Okay, at IGN.com, and you can be a bit cheeky and find and work those out. I've done that definitely, and it's a little creepy. I mean, the other thing is Twitter can be a good place to approach people. Some people don't like it, some people do. But if you send them a cool link, like if you say to them, "Hey, I want to email you about my game. Can I get an email address?" They'll say no. But if it's something that's already out there that you've already got a website for, sending them a URL, I get sent a lot of stuff, and I'm never going to reply to someone who says, "Hey, can I get your email address so I can send you something to look at?" Because I don't have the time and I don't want to enter into that. But if you send me a link to something cool while I'm on Twitter, I might never acknowledge that I clicked it, but I'll probably click it because something came up and it's a shiny and I'll click on it. And if I was a game journalist, then that's an opportunity there to get something cool. But I think Twitter makes things a lot easier.
And a lot of the bios, check people's bios, because they'll be like, I think it's at that point now where it's, people will say, "Don't talk to me on here about business," or "This is my personal account," or whatever.
And respect that, right?
Here is my email, so fire it there, and that's cool. There's just all these ways, like you say, of just sleuthing it out, and it's it's just elbow grease. It's nothing smart.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Are you guys ready to move on to YouTubers? Because it's an area
the
I
internet
know nothing
is.
about. So yeah, I guess how have you guys found getting? Oh, I guess let's start with how effective have you found YouTube coverage relative to classic website coverage?
It's weird. It's shifted. With Thomas Was Alone, it was invaluable. Thomas Was Alone came out middle of 2012 and got reviews, I'd say, on about 5 of the bigger websites, not all of them, but on the bigger ones, reasonably good reviews, and kind of did well comfortably. But it really wasn't until the YouTubers found it a few months later where it kind of took off, and I think that simply just was the number of eyeballs that were directed, and also I think there were fewer games, which meant that the YouTubers had less stuff to make content of, so you would get a YouTuber making a series on you, and if that was, I remember Rithian over at Yogscast did a whole series, and like a series that was so popular there was fan art of his YouTube series, not of the game, of him in that YouTube series. So like that stuff all piles up, but honestly, like with Volume, we've not seen quite the same kind of conversion. I've talked to a few people, and I think YouTube is becoming noise in the same way as articles are. That it's all good. Don't get me wrong. Like coverage is great and it's super useful, but I don't think it's the same kind of Total Biscuit makes a video that says your game's okay. Oh my god, you've sold thousands of units. I don't think that trade. I see more of a slow build as people do stuff, rather than like with Thomas, I can literally point to the graph and go, that's Nerd Cubed, that's Total Biscuit, that's PewDiePie. Like I can point those out, and I feel like the YouTubers don't quite have that conversion they used to, even with the games that they like. I just think their shine's come off a little bit. We'll see what the next thing is.
Yeah. Cool, Andrew. How have you found it?
We just haven't had any, so it's hard to say at the minute.
Yeah, I mean that leads on to the other side of things of like how do you get them to cover your game? Because like I got into this really weird point where we were about to, or I was starting to think about when we announced the first game for Foam Sword, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna like Pixel Prospector also has a list of YouTubers. I'm like, I'm gonna go through these YouTubers and find the one, and I'm like, wait, I shouldn't contact them until I release it. Like until they have something to play that's utterly useless. What am I doing?
Yeah.
But I still found a bunch of YouTubers that I like, and I basically use them for game recommendations now. But at the time,
so you're a consumer of their content rather than
exactly.
That's cool. I think the trick is to remember. I use the analogy. We if a YouTuber is David Beckham, we make football boots. So it's like ultimately you have to know that you're Adidas in this scenario, right? So you don't go and tell David Beckham about the cool new pair of shoes that you're currently working on, because he doesn't care. He can't wear them. Something just came. Is that a cat?
That is a cat tail that I'm holding out of camera range.
That's awesome. That mean, if there's a cat tail there, then that means there's a cat bottom just behind it. Yeah. Which would be a perfect kind of visual metaphor for my conversation. It's go to them when you have something that's of value, and the thing that you can have a value is a game they can play. Their audience, no YouTuber's audience watches their channel, or very few YouTube audiences watch the channel for the game. They're watching for the person. They're watching for that person's opinion of the game, maybe, but like they want that personality. So you're creating effectively background material for them. So your game, needs to work in that context for them. So yeah, I it's a very, very weird thing, but I always basically just think, okay, so who is this game going to give good content to? And work from there. I love that cat tail coming to shot. It's thrown me off like 5 times. That's awesome. Be useful. It's the same. It's the same thing as the journalists. Make their job easier to do, and they will be very grateful, and they will use your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I find really interesting, and it's a trend that I'm not necessarily ready to jump onto, but I think replayability is a big thing for a lot of YouTubers. I think if you have a one playthrough game, they'll play through it once, maybe even less. If you have a game that's repeatable, I mean, the number of episodes of someone playing Binding of Isaac I've watched is ridiculous.
But the problem there is, so I think there's 2 issues there. One is obviously that Binding of Isaac is a massive outlier, right? Like it's a super rare occasion. You'll probably see one of those games every 2 or 3 years. But the other thing is that I feel like that repetition became a thing because there weren't many games. Like a YouTuber today, I mean, I've spoken to guys who get like 30 games sent to them, 30 different games sent to them a day.
Wow.
And at that level, like, it has to be an amazing game for them to not cover a new game. You're fighting for their hours at that point. So I think it's important just in case you are making Binding of Isaac, like if you're going to make that game. But I don't think it's as common as it was. You don't see many, like survival games, for example, very much grew out of this idea, and you don't see many recurring survival game streams beyond, the obvious kind of Minecraft, Rust, the big hitters. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I guess is there like, I guess, how do you actually contact YouTubers? Like I've actually never, I got to the point where I researched them and then I started watching them and then I could get in touch because
And then you're just like, these guys are funny. I'll just watch them.
Yeah, these are great. I just watch them all the time. But like, is it, do you normally message them through their YouTube channels? Do they have, email addresses that they publish, or?
Some do. It varies. So the bigger ones will often have like a PR firm that will act as a middleman that you can email, that they'll give an email address for. A lot of guys just put up their email addresses. Most of them are on Twitter. So if you can approach them on Twitter, that can work. I've had some success with that. Honestly, I just tend to find any details I can on them and just blitz. And we did it with we used Do Distribute for our keys, which basically, what's nice about that is that I mean, Rami's done a really good job. It's a lovely system, but the key thing with the YouTubers is you have a lot of people pretending to be YouTubers now. I swear like 50 Total Biscuits asked for a key for volume. Fortunately, the real one got one, but like the rest of them didn't. And that's where Do Distribute has like people they can check they can prove that they are who they say they are. So it's an important step for us that we always make sure, because honestly, there's a lot of chances out there, and to be honest, and like honestly, like I kind of tend to give chances keys just because I think they're funny. I get people to like draw me. I say like, if you can send me a picture of a cat in the next 5 minutes, you can have a free key. And if they manage it, then I give them a free key. Like stuff like that is fun, but like from a promotional point of view, you don't want to stop trying to get your game to Total Biscuit because you think you've already given it Total Biscuit. So it's a balancing act.
We tend, well, we've not really done much in terms of YouTubers, but we've met several at Minecon. That was good. I know that's like a real sort of exceptional thing, but just any convention you're at, like these days, you'll know whether there is like yogscars doing their signings.
Look towards the circle of screaming children and just head for the middle of that circle.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've met a few that I've later found out are sort of like quite big, and I hadn't got a clue. I think maybe that helped because I didn't like treat them like I didn't pander to them or like try and suck up. I was just like, there's just like one American guy who was just like, this looks awesome, and I was like, yeah, it fucking is, high five. And we were just like, sorry, beep. It's sort of just like I just engaged with him as I would of anyone who showed an interest in my game. And it turned out he was Bacon Donut TV, who's
he's a cool guy, yeah,
good guy. And he was like, oh hey, by the way, here's my card, get in touch, like I'd love some keys or whatever. And like, yeah, so there is like that's how I've seen any success really. We've held off like pushing the game particularly, so like I'm still sort of like got stuff waiting in the wings to happen, so maybe if we do series 2 I'll let you know how it goes. But yeah, I think just like we said, you kind of treat them like you do the press in the terms of like trying to find how to get in touch with them and like getting in touch, but again, that personal level to the relationship, like being a face they remember or they had a nice chat with that time, that can count for something as well.
Yeah, that's certainly how like the more long-term like relationships I've had with YouTubers. It's because you can't fake that stuff. You can't. Well, not for long anyway. Like, right? Like you can't. And I have got mates who are YouTubers, and it's not something you can pretend to do. You just have to be at things and meet people and put yourself out there and yeah, treat them like human beings because they are human beings. Yeah.
I guess that's sort of the main two topics I want to cover today. I guess, chat, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in. We'll keep talking about other things. But yeah, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in and we'll try and get to them. I know Mike's got to run very sharply at 8, so we'll see what we can do until then. One thing, it is the end of the year, it is the end of the season. Are there any trends for next year that you're particularly interested in?
I mean, I've jumped on the VR bandwagon quite substantially.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I have no idea how it's going to go, but we've had a lot of fun building Coda, so I'm hoping that we get to at least be part of that. Yeah. I think it's going to be a really interesting year for that.
I think that I think it's been a really interesting year this year for freemium games on PC.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that next year we're going to start. I mean, I know we already are seeing with like Smite and etc. on Xbox One, but we're going to start seeing like console and hobbyist games catch up a little bit with mobile, if I can phrase it like that. Like mobile people just accept it. Like there are good freemium games, there are bad ones, there are ones that are cynical, there are ones that aren't, and I think we're going to probably see quite a lot of that, and there's probably going to be some interesting stuff happening. Clicker games as well, or tapper games. I think like there's like this weird like devolvement or devolution like RPGs to like half-minute hero, and then like clickers and tappers. And I think that actually it's really like the way that freemium has in some ways. I think that that's going to be interesting watching how that sort of re-informs the way people think about other genres. Like I think we're really comfortable with mashups, like match 3 but, you know. So I think it's going to be that might be quite an interesting one as well. Yeah.
Cool. We've got our first question from Jordy288. Do you guys think that television coverage of games is valuable? I've been doing that. I put games on TV, and I wonder if any game dev or indie
Jordy's
game
just
devs
showing
value
off. That's all Jordy's doing right now. Touch me. Yeah, it's all useful. I've certainly had. It's weird if I find that it opens up me to other audiences. So Thomas Was Alone, for example, like this was very much the year where Thomas Was Alone became like a normal people game, like in terms of like it wasn't just gamers playing it, and I think a large part of that was some TV appearance stuff, and I was on the front page of them in 4OD for a week with Charlie we did like a Let's Play thing on Channel 4, which was fun. I got called by my mum saying, "Mike, you're on the front of the TV," and then that was the whole thing. So I think it's useful, as all coverage is. I'm always cautious because I think it's a very weird one, and TV, you can get lost in. I think you assume that everything that's on TV gets 1 million viewers, and to be honest, a lot of it doesn't. So a bigger YouTuber might well be a much, or even a medium level YouTuber might be a bigger win than being on one of the mainstream channels in your country. So it's always balancing out. But yeah, I think it's all useful. Anywhere I get to like try and sell stuff, I'm happy to do. Volume $20 on PC and PlayStation.
Yeah, I know when we were at Mind Candy, we found TV to be a really valuable thing. I mean, I think it's one
Presumably
of these things
you were putting a lot of money into advertising.
Yeah,
on TV,
exactly.
right?
I think there's a lot of money, but I think you do need to have a certain amount of reach already before your TV ad kicks in. I mean, there's the classic thing I mentioned last episode of like, until you see something 6 or 8 times, you're really not ready to act on it. But if you're something that is already extremely popular, I think TV is good for adding like 2 or 3 to that count. Yeah. If you can afford it, obviously.
I think, Mike, you touched on the fact that it was a different market as well, and I think it's interesting that like, so TV's changing. Most people who are our age and below don't watch TV the same way people older than us and older do, and so like by putting an ad on TV, you're reaching someone who would never see your game in any other way, and that's like an interesting angle if that suits what you're going for. They're also probably the kind of people that don't own a console. Or like think of any of their devices as gaming devices.
That's primarily a really good point. Yeah, I wonder if it's more useful. Well, it probably is much more useful for people who are making your kind of mobile games than kind of PC games, right? Like I assume that's a much bigger deal.
I mean, you do see Call of Duty ads, but like nowhere near as many as you see for.
But that's at scale, right? Like that's
exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. You get more free-to-play adverts than Call of Duty adverts.
Yeah, and I think as long as they're making the money they're making, every Super Bowl in America is going to have a Clash of Clans and a Game of War, and match 3, whatever King's latest match 3 is.
I mean, at Super Bowl, I presume that's as much about showing off to your shareholders as actually trying to advertise your product, right? Like that's a statement you're making, right?
Yeah, but it's also, the Super Bowl is sort of this strange thing in that there's people that watch the Super Bowl just for the ads, and it's it's an ad that if you get it right, everyone's going to talk about it. I love your country.
I love your country.
It's an amazing place. It's like there's this thing happening, but I'm just going to watch the adverts for it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
But speaking of adverts, the next question is from Vazan. Do you guys see any value, positive or negative, in website advertisement for your game? He says, I can't think of many indies that I've seen as adverts, but then he admits to using AdBlock.
I think Vazan's answered his own question there, hasn't he? There certainly is some value, but I think it's often... I mean, we've certainly looked into it, and it's a lot of expense. And And like he says, like a lot of, especially if you are making games for a more hardcore audience, then frankly, yeah, a lot of those people are using ad blocks. So I can't advertise my game to you, Vazan, through these adverts, but I can for no money, a little bit more effort, but no money, I can get coverage. Like I can. That's the thing is, I think, and it's a big shift that you see in websites. People ask why are video game websites doing more coverage of like movies and stuff, and the reason is that means they can attract more generalist advertising, because I don't think anyone's spending money on video game focused targeting right now, because honestly I can have one PewDiePie video of my game and it will have more views and impressions than a very expensive advertising campaign. And if that's my position, imagine what it's like if you're making a AAA game. There's no point paying for advertising unless you are in that mega stratosphere. So no, I'll get coverage. I will get YouTubers to play my game, and that's how I'll get to you, Vazan. And I will get to you, and I will have your money. But Adblock has made it kind of pointless, I think.
I think there's an interesting sort of side to when like you're right. I think a lot of like the big players do still buy out, like they sponsored, Eurogamer for like 3 weeks, like one either side and the launch week. And that's more about like shoving everyone else out of the of the airwaves than it is them being like the primary. Like every game in new Fallout 3 was 4 was coming out, or whatever it is, I can't remember. And nobody was going to miss that, and the people that were going to buy it were going to buy it. It was always going to go nuts. But I think that they sort of insure. There's like an amount of insurance, I suppose, that like it squeezes out the chance that something else might just pop up and spoil their day. Or whatever. I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one. I don't think that another game being advertised on a website during that time is what's going to flick it. But it's just like by just saturating everything. I think that's the tactic rather than going.
There's probably a term for this, but like there's that. I think there's something you're aiming for, especially in your launch week, where you want to have this sense of inevitability. Like that, it's the only game. Like it's one already. Like if you want to buy it, then that's great. But like we don't care because we're already a mega hit. And I think that advertising is a very good way of creating that perception. Like how many times have you like been kind of I might get a game, and then it's just been all you've heard about for a week. So you're like, I gotta play it because everyone's gonna be talking about it. Fine, I'll go and buy it. Or is that it? Might just be me.
No, I definitely have that.
But that's the thing, right? And that's what they've paid for. They've paid. Someone has sat down with a spreadsheet and gone, right, which websites do Mike and Moo and Smithy visit? I don't know why they call me Mike, you Moo, and you Smithy. That seems incredibly rude to have different. I don't know the naming conventions. They're marketing people, but they've sat down and they've gone, right. How can we own that guy's day? How can we absolutely hit him on the way to work and on the bus and on the and there is value to that, but that's at the upper end where you've got the money to spend that. I can't, as an indie developer, do that. So yeah, we've tried a few things. We did some experiments with Twitter ads and didn't have an amazing kind of reaction to it, so kind of skipped that. But there's way cheaper ways of me getting your attention, and you can't block them.
I think one of the great things about those kinds of things or that kind of advertising is you can track it trivially, and you can run a small campaign and be like, well, that wasn't worth it, I'm done.
Exactly, that's true.
That's actually a really, like, as a sort of an aside, it's a really valid way of testing whether you should even make a game, like right at the beginning. I know a lot of mobile companies do this because they're just sort of like they're templating other games, like they're just copying stuff. But essentially, you just register a website and just say, put a coming soon image on it with a logo. Spend £100 doing that, and then you spend like £200 buying a bunch of Facebook ads that point that way and are targeted at the people that you would expect to. And if you get a good return on clicks, you're like, that's a popular idea.
But also what's really interesting is, because the metrics are so good, is you can use it as a way of testing stuff that's free. So one thing we did with Volume, for example, was we wanted to know which screenshot we should use on launch day. So we got some Twitter advertising, and we showed like different images, and we ran those as adverts on Twitter, and then we saw like, that image gets twice the clicks of every other image. And it was the one of Charlie's face, like getting the mask on. It's like that's the one that people care about. I guess it's a human being or whatever, but like so you can use these analytics to test marketing stuff, and then what you do is you take that image, and then that's the image you send off to all of the websites, which is free, but you're using that data and that understanding. And there are experts in the field who do this for a living and are much better than us, but I think we can steal some of their ideas, and that can help. If you've got a bit of money to test an idea, it's worth it.
Yep. Yeah, and you can just do it so much more cost effectively than actually building out the game and then finding out that, oh, actually there's no interest in this kind of thing. Although I guess it's always hard because these analytics, I think a lot of times they don't paint the whole picture, and I think it's sort of it's easy to misinterpret things. I definitely know we had apps where we were like, oh, we're going to test a bunch of icons, and we tested them, and they're like, oh my god, this one does incredibly well. And then when you sort of actually release the app, in context, it just didn't do it anywhere near as well as the previous test would have implied. But yeah, I definitely think it's a good way to get some information. And
it's definitely not a perfect science as much as marketing people would like to tell you it is. Yeah.
Cool. It looks like those are all the questions we've got, and this is the end of this series. I guess I might as well let each of you sign off independently, and we'll be back, Mike. We'll be back, so don't worry about it. Okay, but sign off and plug anything you want.
Go on, Smithy.
All right. Well, meant a lot that you've been watching and listening, and hopefully taking some of our advice. Been quite blown away by it, actually. Like nice comments and stuff. I think it's been more successful than we all could have hoped. I should say hi to Vazan because he was watching me on Twitch the other day. Tango Fiesta.
But he wasn't paying for the advertising on Twitch when you were on there.
Tango Fiesta is out now on Steam. We're going to do a big update sort of January time. Hopefully, sort of turn its fortunes around. Keep an eye on Twitter at Spiltmilk Studio and sort of follow us along. Should be fun. I'll whinge less as well.
To echo what Smithy said, I think this has gone a lot better than the three of us hoped when we started. The only objective, and it's Moo that's doing most of the work here, by the way. We're visible on the channel, but it's Moo that's going off and actually producing this stuff and working out what we do and keeping us on topic. So it's gone really well, and hopefully it's been useful. I hope we get to continue next year because it's been fun. In terms of plugging, you should buy Volume and Thomas Was Alone. They're both available. But Thomas Was Alone is available on everything you own. Volume is on PlayStation 4, PC, soon Vita. Not saying when, but soon. And is by all accounts a good game, which is nice. And then next year is Coda, which is the free DLC, which I feel really bad about because it's really good and I should be charging money. That sounds like marketing, but I'm genuinely annoyed that I said free because it's really good. So that's coming out for free on PlayStation VR, kind of near to launch or at launch. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but it's at launch. And then some other things next year that I can't talk about yet. But yeah, it's an exciting year ahead, and it's been a pretty awesome year, this one. So thanks so much for watching.
Yeah, I mean, same here. I mean, I just sort of, I messaged these guys saying that I met a lot of people that don't even know where to start asking questions about game dev, and we just sort of wanted to sort of lay out a really rough pass on a bunch of different topics so that people could sort of take those things in and hopefully they know what to ask next. So one thing that's really important for me is if you guys want to tweet any of us, any of the deeper topics you want covered next series, you can also email anything to gamefactorypodcast@gmail.com. Personally, I don't know if anyone knows, but I'm part of an indie company that's sort of just starting up called Foam Sword. And we've got a mailing list that you can go to foamswordgames.com and you can sign up to our mailing list. We talked about mailing list last time. We'll be sending out our first screenshot hopefully this week or next week. So, if you want to see a little bit about what we're working on, and hopefully we'll be announcing the game properly sometime next year. So yeah, it should be cool.
Exciting times.
But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for listening and tuning in and giving all the feedback, and the comments on YouTube have been great, the reviews on iTunes, but obviously everyone, if you'd like to recommend this to friends, we're going to go on a little hiatus, they'll have some time to catch up. But yeah, recommend things to friends, give us likes and subscribes on YouTube, subscribe to our Twitch channel, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but yeah, thanks everyone. And signing off, I am one of Moo.
I'm Mike Bithell.
And I'm at Spilt Milk Studio.
Awesome. Should we do the wave and then I'll remember to press the stop streaming button? Wave.